Okay, ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and today we're talking about Akatosh. This is actually the first in our series of Aedra-themed streams, or podcasts, excuse me, where we're just going to go through every one of the Aedra. I'm pretty sure we're doing them in alphabetical order, and we'll talk about...
Akatosh.
Yeah, I mean, but we'll talk about variations that take into account, you know, various racial beliefs and such. Anyway, I just mentioned my name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are
Felix, also known as Banu Hanamasaishi.
As Jonathan, also known as Sothis on Reddit and everywhere.
Element OP. Yeah, the next one would be RK. That's right. Oh, hey, I'm still on the splash screen. Hey, there we are.
Hey, wonderful.
Okay, didn't quite do it right this time. There we go.
It's fine.
I'm not going to do it over. I'm not after the last one.
That was nuts. Like, all right, third time's the charm, right?
Right, fourth time's the charm, fifth time's the charm. Yeah, repeatedly, over and over and over again. Yeah. All right. I apologize. I'm very jet lagged. I just got back from Denver and like last night at midnight, and so I don't know where my head is. So I'm going to talk about something that loses its mind a lot.
Perfect.
So the first thing I think we need to cover is, I mean, we've discussed the Aedra in a previous podcast in a very general sense, and I am going to kind of rehash a couple of points very briefly, specifically. The idea of, oh, that's a good point, Matthew. I just realized you were talking that I probably don't need to be streaming this in 60 FPS. That's valid. So frame rate's really important to this stream. You got to get your lore at 60 frames a second. So one of the first things I wanted to cover that I don't think we covered in our previous general Aedra stream was the idea of people worshiping forces of nature. We do occasionally make little nods every once in a while to older religions like nature-based religions like Shintoism. But we're usually talking about Shinto that worship aspects of nature or gods that reflect what we now consider to be natural processes. And the purpose of the Aedra were to take on the one of the suggested purposes of the Aedra was the was to have divine entities take on the rules of nature, and you can cue your Metal Gear Solid theme at this point. And the reason why that's important is because obviously Mundus could not exist without rules. That's part of the whole principality of the thing. You have to have place rules around a concept in order for the concept to become real. That's just the basic sort of, I don't know, we don't have a term for it, but I guess wheel theory in the Elder Scrolls. If you ever want to create something, you have to take total chaos and then introduce limits or rules, limitations, and that's where reality comes from. And Akatosh is one of the generally considered by a few cultures in the Elder Scrolls to be one of the 8 rules of nature that now that are responsible for creating reality. And specifically, Akatosh is the god of time, of linear event. So without Akatosh, you can't have things like a future, and without Akatosh, you can't have things like a past, which also means that without Akatosh, you can't have a thing like memory, because if you have no previous events, you can't remember anything. So I agree, Matthew. I think Akatosh is you could probably argue, and I would probably agree with you, that Akatosh is the most important and relevant Aedra to the existence of Mundus. I would probably say that Lorcan is at least right up there with him, if not equally important, because Lorcan also represents the concept of three-dimensional space and of, of the physical separation, which is also very important. But a lot of very early religions in a lot of very early cultures in Tamriel reference Akatosh almost every time, and they don't necessarily have an analog for physical space, which is what Lorecon is supposed to represent, or what Lorecon could represent. So, do we want to cover at all the variations of the sort of thematic cultural variations of Akatosh, meaning like the Khajiit's version of Alkosh at all? Where do you guys want to start?
Well, okay, so they all kind of occupy the same sphere, but the problem is that there are differences between them. I mean, Alkosh is for the Khajiit, whereas Ariel is for the Altmer, right? So there are these differences. So you could kind of view them all as part of the same Aka shard, if you will.
Sure.
But I generally tend to view them as different deities because different people worship them, and by worshiping them give them a form of power and influence, and well, it's their mimic, right? Like Alkosh is not Akatosh by virtue of his mimic. However, that does mean we should probably talk about how Akatosh became Akatosh and was separated from Ariel with the Maracati Selectives, which is, fun fact, people, if you didn't already know, that's where this Lorecast gets its name from.
That's right.
I don't know what Jonathan wants to add to that, though.
I mean, how everything splits off, as mentions in the Aldudaga.
7 fights of the Aldudaga.
Yeah, that what you said.
That right.
Jesus.
I mean, I'll start off with that. So there's this concept that's been flown around for years of the. I think it was originally posted as the shattered mirror theory or something like that, where Akatosh or the Aka shards were all pieces of a broken mirror, and that mirror was the original time dragon.
Yeah,
but the Aldugada, did I get it right?
Aldudaga.
Damn it! I'm gonna get it wrong every time.
Yeah.
It mentions how Alduin was shed from Akatusk. So I've always thought it's less of a breaking and more of a transformation from aspect to aspect.
Possibly, although the reason why you keep seeing references to Akatosh or Alkosh or whatever, Altusk or whatever, Akatusk, breaking in some respect is because of, that's tends to be what Akatosh does.
Absolutely, yeah, and I totally get that.
Yeah. But it does represent, it does sort of illustrate how fragile time is in Mundus, and as any reasonably knowledgeable lore nerd knows, breaking Akatosh is something that people seem to be doing for a hobby. There's like a club. They have T-shirts. And that's a shame that it happens as often as it does as sort of like a plot device in Elder Scrolls lore, because it's supposed to be obscenely hard to do.
Well, okay. I want to touch on that. I don't think it actually happens as much as people think it does. So there's a lot of people who, like, basically one of the big things that people who are kind of into the lore tend to do is talk about the Dragon Break as a retcon device.
Yes.
And even now I don't remember who it was. One of the ESO devs was asked if ESO took place in a Dragon Break.
Yep.
And he said, no, it is canon. And I think that kind of does a disservice to the concept of a Dragon Break.
Yeah, just because it's in a canon break doesn't mean it isn't canon.
Exactly. The original concept of the Dragon Break, created because of the Warp of the West, was to consolidate the six of the 7, I think it was.
Yeah.
6 of the endings of Daggerfall, as these all actually happened at the same time.
Because, again, Bethesda tries really hard not to neutralize player choice. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I mean, I can list off the known Dragon Breaks just on one hand, pretty much. It's you've got the Middle Dawn, the Red Moment, Rimmen. The activation of Numidium. Yeah, in Rimmen. The first time they activated, was it Rimmen? I'm pretty sure it was Rimmen. The first time that Tiber Septim activated Numidium.
No, isn't that the Arcturian heresy where Tiber Septim becomes Tiber Septim and puts the Mantella into the Numidium, and that causes the Dragon Break?
Yeah, but didn't he do that in the Halls of Colossus? Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
the Halls of Colossus elsewhere. How's that?
Yeah, not in Rimmen, but in elsewhere. Yeah, okay. That's why I was like, I don't think it's happening in Rimmen, but yeah. Okay, so back it up. Let's do it again. Hold on. Let's start over.
Okay. So
the Middle Dawn,
Red Moment, elsewhere.
Yeah, Alinor. The activation of Numidium. I'm sorry, what's the fourth one?
Alinor.
When it attacks Alinor.
To conquer it, when he's trying to conquer it.
To conquer it. Warp in the West. Basically, the new Psijic quest line. There was a mini one.
Oh, yeah, there's a little bit of one, yeah.
Okay, so that's 6.
If you can consider Alduin's trap through time a Dragon Break, it kind of is.
I really don't. Though.
I don't like to. Yeah.
I don't like to, but I know a lot of people who do. And end of list. Maybe the soul burst. Maybe. End of list. It doesn't happen that often.
Well, so far. And then, I mean, we've also got, there's a Dragon Break when Numidium comes back in the 5th era.
Okay. Also, I would argue that a form of Dragon Break occurred when Akatosh had all his elven traits purged out of him to become Akatosh, the god of men.
Well, that's the Middle Dawn.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So
and like the dance of the tower, the dance of the dragons, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And like
that takes place in the Middle Dawn, right? Okay.
Right, exactly. And like 90% of those are just Numidium. Like it's hard to do unless your name is Denial.
Numidium. Yeah.
Unless your name is, to put it as Trainwiz said, Brass Daddy.
Yeah, Brass Daddy.
No.
Brass Daddy is that's Sothasil.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Sothasil is the Brass Daddy. Yeah. Numidium is Numi-chan, right. Sothasil is Brass Daddy, Numidium is Numi-chan. Right.
Yeah. This is if you guys have never played ESO with Trainwiz, I highly recommend it. It's it's like meme gold.
Dude, even his house is a meme. Have you been to it?
No. Oh no.
He built a train out of all of the house goods.
Because of course he did.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, what a man! But anyway, we're starting to get off topic. So
So X-Witch is asking how does a Dragon Break work anyway, and that's sort of like explaining how a Dragon Break works is difficult because we rarely, if ever, get reports of first-hand reports of what it's like. ESO does explain it a little bit, but basically what we've gathered is that multiple events can happen simultaneously that are contradictory. So there's I don't remember if it's a dev post or an in-character post from back in like Morrowind days where they explain it like if a town could exist in 2 places simultaneously, a person could be dead and then suddenly show up in someone's living room saying that they've always been alive and that there's no problems, or another person could be a person could run into himself as a like alternate reality version, with a goatee and an agonizer, and and that kind of stuff. And it's sort of like multiple rails colliding into the same spot to make an epic train crash. Thank you, not Trainwiz. And and that's sort of like, and that does kind of do a pretty good way of describing it. Is it's sort of like all those sci-fi alternate reality plot lines all happening at the same time in the same place, and obviously this is extremely disturbing. People will actually experience being alive and dead at the same time, and the fallout from that is that Akatosh, once he realizes that once the personification of time starts to giving birth to your own father, once all of the timelines start to, once the effect wears off, basically, things have to be righted again, and that's when the Jills come out. The Jills are the daughter dragons of Akatosh, and they are called the Time Menders, and their job is to go around and basically decide what's real, like what's actually happening. The Jills decide what's canon.
they're the anti-Numidium kind of.
Yeah, they are. They are and they aren't. They go around and they've given a choice of 5 options. They say they say no 4 times and yes once, which is still better than Numidium. And so what they have to go, things that would give the Doctor a heart attack. Exactly, because I'm seeing David Tennant go, it's a fixed point in time, and then looking around and going, well, bugger that. And so that's sort of like, the Jills are supposed to, which text mentions the Jills? Any in-game ones? I don't fucking remember.
Yeah, yes, but also I don't remember.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure the Jills are mentioned in-game text somewhere in a very offhanded way, and then I believe the reason why they came up at all on the forums, on the old Bethesda forums, was because somebody literally asked, "What the hell's a Jill?" And in the French translation in ESO, that's cool.
In the which what you broke up there? What translation?
In the French translation in ESO, apparently, of ESO, they mentioned the Jills directly.
Yes, I do remember that.
And so that's sort of one of the, but they, it's a rhyme book. And so they have I wonder how much influence Schick had in the French translation for ESO, because he translates French stories all the time from Dumas.
Really?
So
I would say probably
quite a bit, probably. Yeah.
Just to quickly go back to something though about first-hand or second-hand
testimonials.
Testimonials about dragon breaks. There is the book "Where Were You When the Dragon Broke?" And it talks to Corax from Cyrodiil, a member of the Elder Council, Merha Nabisi, a Dunmer, Trian Mistress of the New Temple, Relethar, Khajiit, Tender to the Main, and Manamarco, the God of Worms himself.
Yeah. Which is great. How do you think they sat him down? Do you think they were like, come on, come with us and have some Canis Root tea and talk about dragon breaks? And he's like, well, I am busy plotting and being generally evil, but sure.
No, I mean, Manamarco probably knocked on the author's door and said, "Yeah, hi, sit the fuck down. I'm going to tell you a thing." And the guy's like, okay, please don't kill me and raise me as a thrall. I'll do what you say.
He sat down there on the same way he sat for Vivek's trial. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I like to imagine it very 60 Minutes style, very formal.
2 people sitting opposite, a bunch of lights. Yeah, me too. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
So anyway, skipping over the meme, the way Manamarco talks about it is actually really interesting. He says, and I quote, "As for myself, I was here and there and here again, like the rest of the mortals during the Dragon Break. How do you think I learned my mystery? The Marukati Selectives showed us all the glories of the dawn so that we might learn, simply, as above, so below." So that right there kind of tells you, if you follow Manamarco's whole shtick, that kind of lets you know how he came to be Manamarco, is it was because of the Dragon Break. And he sort of understood how it was working and was able to channel that into becoming the God of Worms. So that to me is really fascinating and something that could be easily overlooked. You're like, oh, hey, that's cool. They got a quote from the guy, and just close the book. Not think wait a minute, that actually has really huge consequences.
Well, if you weren't already guessing that Mannimarco's quote was written, or possibly the entire document was written by Kirkbride, you're probably right, because as below also above, or as above also below, is associated with Hermeticism in the Tarot. I'm literally reading a Wikipedia entry right now because I couldn't remember the source of this quote. It comes from a 16th century scholar whose name I do not want to pronounce live on the air. And the phrase can be taken to indicate that earthly matters must reflect the operation of the astral plane. Particularly, this is, by the way, the official quote is "as above, so below." So, what that means is that they say the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. So, ideally speaking, this is sort of like and also this also sends up in a translation of the Lord's Prayer from Matthew 6:10, which is a version of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, reveal who you are, set the world right, do what's best, as above, so below. Okay. So it's a but in this particular case, in Hermeticism at the very least, it's supposed to say that it's supposed to mean that the perfect machine resembles, the perfect system resembles heaven. So if it's a rule in heaven, you should endeavor to make it a rule on earth. How well that works depends on who you are, I guess.
Well, it also has to do with the fact that Akatosh is, depending on who you ask, an Etata, and therefore an ancestor spirit, right? So it's also like these are our ancestors, which also makes the whole as above, so below thing kind of relevant, because you below are basically behaving the same way that your ancestors would behave, or would have you behave. Which is why there's all the conflict between, men and mare and all sorts of bullshit. But another thing to derive importance from, with regards to the importance of Akatosh, or rather specifically Ariel, because that's where the source comes from, is it wasn't until he took form and emerged that linear time began, and then spirits were aware that they had like a past, a present, and a future. And that's really where we start to see linear time emerge, and sort of not yet the birth of the dragon god of time, but definitely the god of time. Who at this point actually still has very large associations with the sun at this point.
It's interesting that I just realized I may have made a mistake in thinking in my logic here, which is that I assumed that without linear time you can't have memory. But I don't think that's necessarily true, because that's the same kind of thinking that's the same kind of real-world physics thinking that makes you think that people breathe air in Tamriel, which is also not necessarily true. So it is, so like, for example, if that theory was correct and that you can't have memory without linear time, then you could say that no entity that exists in the Aetherius has a memory of any kind, which I don't think is necessarily true.
And I would jump in and say it might be true without time you can't have memory, but linear time destroys memory. You forget over time. That's
true. Yeah. That could be that could be valid. That sounds a little more Elder Scrollsy. Yeah. Yeah.
I would also add a sort of side note, as it were, that memory doesn't begin with, Akatosh or Oriel and linear time. Memory begins after the first active interplay between Anu and Padme, and that's a constant that you see reflected in all the creation myths, where I think for me the Yokunan one puts it most succinctly, which is as the old world died and the new world began anew, so too did spirits realize their place in it, and they're like, oh, oh, so this is how things work. Okay, and that's kind of, you know, because they can remember how things first started, and so that's kind of like, okay, well, without the interplay, they couldn't have had the opportunity to do that. So that's really where it comes from. Though it would be kind of nice to ascribe such power to Akatosh.
But I don't.
Although generally speaking, and this is probably a good segue, Akatosh is very powerful, even though we don't see him interacting as an Aedra very much. Like we see the Daedra, we know that they have far more power and influence over the mortal realm. But Akatosh is kind of a special case because he really doesn't like Lorcan. And Lorcan, despite being the missing god, is goddamn pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
He's under Red Mountain, he's in the sky, he sends his avatars in the form of Shezarines to be agents of change. So there's Akatosh like, well, I gotta do something. And he's like, all right, here, I know this, you know, the Chimel Audibal or whatever is technically the congealed blood of Lorcan, but he basically says to Alessia or Alessia, however you pronounce it, hey, so here's the thing, make a covenant with this symbol of a vagina and I will protect the world.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, cool. And then we also have Dragonborns, where Akatosh is like, all right, these are basically my answer to Lorcan's Shezarine, so have fun with that bullshit. And because he's the dragon god of time, he can also kind of say to Lorcan the whole, oh, hey, look at all this change. And, you know, Lorcan's like the tornado who goes through and changes everything up. And then Akatosh is the guy who goes in after to sweep it up and piece it all back together. So in many ways, he's a very involved Aedra, which, according to like our general understanding of Aedra, shouldn't really be possible, yet there's overwhelming evidence of it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And just to step in on one minor thing, Akatosh gave Alessia his own heart's blood, which is also Lorcan's heart's blood, if other stories are to be believed. Which, I mean,
well, yeah, because I thought the Chimel Audibal was formed at the top of White Gold Tower, because when Akatosh shot Lorcan's heart to the east, some drops of blood dripped down on top of the tower, and that formed the crystal.
Well, that just depends on what story you want to believe.
Right, okay. Fair enough.
The Red Diamond song says it fell into an Aeolid well and then crystallized, and then the Aeolids carved it into the gem. Or diamond crystal. And then, so it says it's Lorcan's blood. And then in Oblivion, I mean, I know it's a splash screen, like a load screen, but I know it's from some book, the Trials of Alessia. Yeah, it's the Trials of Alessia, that says that Akatosh used his own heart's blood and gave it to her as the covenant.
Okay, but does that necessarily mean that's the crystal, or his own heart's blood to pump through her veins and therefore be dragonborn? Is it clear on that or no?
Yeah, it's clear. It is Chimel Audibal that he makes with his own heart's blood. Let me see if I can find the exact quote.
Ooh, another way you could think about that is it's my own heart's blood, because he recognizes that Lorcan's heart is his own heart. That could work. I actually really like that now. That's
part of the idea behind Lorcan and Akatosh is that they are the same thing. They're divided.
Red guards get it. That's why they're tropical.
Yeah, it's Anu and Padme. You know, they're supposed to be the same thing.
Exactly.
So.
It's literally Anu and Padme. It's like what, grandchildren or great grandchildren who are fighting.
Happy Satan 999, which is a fine username, asks why Akatosh is depicted in the form of a dragon, and what is it about dragons that are so special? I can actually give you a little bit of meta background on this. One of the reasons why, I mean, Akatosh was a dragon ever since Arena, I think.
Hey, I just noticed. Real White Guar says, "Yo, someone shoot me an invite on mobile." So link.
Yeah, I'm hopefully I got him.
Okay.
So, one of the first things that they started doing when they were revising Elder Scrolls lore for Morrowind and Redguard was they wanted to sort of put a line in the sand about dragons and establish them as being something other than big, powerful lizards that breathe fire. And so introducing all dragons as being some aspect of a of time, or as they the original pitch was that dragons were organic time machines, and that they ate time or produced time or mended time or did something similar, was basically that attempt. Slovakine's correct in the respect that dragons in general as a fantasy trope represent royalty of some kind. Man, I really got to pull that drive. It's gonna slide out of my computer any second now.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And it's but I'm trying to come up with a reason in lore why dragons are considered to be powerful, or are supposed to be representations of power. And I mean, you could argue they don't really need a reason because they're dragons, and why are they powerful? It's because they're freaking powerful. They're freaking dragons. They're
I
have something, unless John's about to say the same thing.
I don't know, maybe, but Ouroboros.
Yes, well, that's exactly what I was going to say.
So that is the symbol of time, really, that links dragons to time.
Well, but the Ouroboros is a symbol generated by man to represent a concept. It's not a. Like dragons did not get their power or their royalty because of a thing called the Ouroboros.
Right. I meant more like in a meta sense.
Oh, well, sure.
That might be where that came from.
Yeah, but I'm kind of trying to approach this from a practical side. So it is partially a cultural concept, but but it's also a concept that's appreciated by divine creatures. For example, Periite, molds itself as a dragon in order to sort of poke fun at other divine creatures. And I got a dog situation. Hold on.
So all right. So I feel like I get what Chris is saying about how, like, sure, we have the meta reason for the Ouroboros, but why did, in terms of, if we jump into the world of Tamriel as if it's real, why and how did dragons originate in the way and the shape they did, and how Akatosh becomes a dragon god as opposed to the sun god associated Ariel.
Mm-hmm.
My general understanding of, or not understanding, but reasoning for why they would take that shape is that it's a continuation and an improvement of the concept of the Serpent of Time, which was Satakal, because he's a giant space snake, basically.
Right.
And I can't remember where I read it, and it might be apocryphal, but it was something about how, like, the Akatosh of tomorrow, his wingspan can't be comprehended because it represents the full breadth of possibility or something. And it's the possibility of tomorrow and the unknown and everything. And that's also why we have, like, the quote tiger dragons of Akavir, which is this future unknown land. So for me, the concept of the dragons and being time is they're more capable, or a more perfect form of Satakal, who came before. Like, he's literally he who came before. So that for me is why it's an improvement upon the concept of just a snake. And now you put wings on a snake and you get a form of dragon. I know there's like 30 different kinds of dragons and dragon serpents and whatnot. There's all kind.
Right.
So
that for me is kind of like the most realistic point that we could go for, like, a lore based reason for why they look like giant lizards. That's my idea.
Yeah, so the wings on the serpent thing, that's actually been something I've thrown around in my head for a long time, basically since Oblivion. In Oblivion, when you're walking around Iliad ruins, there is a statue of Ariel as an eagle or a hawk or some other sort of bird of prey. And if Akatosh is this man-ized Ariel from the Iliad perspective, and Akatosh is a serpent, it just kind of 1 + 1 to 2 wings on a serpent equals dragon. In the same sort of concept there.
Right. Yeah, I like all these.
We're luring.
I think so I think earlier I don't think we really quite answered somebody's question about how does one go about performing a dragon break. One of the sort of drawbacks of personifying a force of nature is that you can sometimes come up with sort of metaphors to explain natural phenomenon, like a dragon break is what happens when an Akatosh gets temporarily distracted by something. I don't think that's quite right. I mean, it could be. I mean, for all we know, the concept of time in Elder Scrolls really does have a consciousness and a train of thought. That's entirely, yeah, sure, maybe. But I like to think of it more like, well, let's say you take the destruction of Yokuda. The destruction of Yokuda, according to some legends, happened because the Pancratosword technique was so incredibly powerful that it was able to basically break the rules of nature. And this, you know, in the process of doing so, caused a giant cataclysmic event or explosion or something. The legend of the destruction of Yokuda does not really go into which laws were violated. But
I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, exactly. But you can assume that it was at least, well, I would suggest that it's certainly one or more. One of those laws being the law of physical space. In other words, the to cut the uncuttable, exactly. At least the laws that Lorcan contributed to. But also probably to a certain degree a large number of other laws that don't have proper names, you know. So and the fact that the Pancratosword technique was sort of alluded to be, if you want, a nuclear reaction of some kind, of splitting the atom, a nuclear fission.
Just to add, I generally like that's one of two main options I feel with regards to the Pancratosword is like Nuke Sword, which is awesome and fun.
Yeah.
But as the infamous Todd Damrath and I have also discussed separately, it could also be the act of actually cutting Lorcan's heart.
Right.
Because that's the uncuttable, right?
Or some part of Lorcan, certainly.
Yeah. And that's also how I've gotten to the theory of, well, you know, if you subscribe to that, it's not that hard then to argue that that was the first known instance of reach heaven by violence, which is why Tamriel is all about reach heaven by violence, because that's how Anu broke the previous dream, by cutting the uncuttable. And that's reflected in him, like basically, you know, you sort of subscribe to the notion that Anu was Yokuda, and that's his memory of the world he came from, right? If you subscribe to that, nuke swords are still also A-okay in my book.
Yeah. That's Matthew points out that it might that the concept by when they say they split the atomos or the indivisible, it was more of a philosophical or metaphor. It was more of a metaphor for what happened than a literal statement. And that's that completely works too. The Pancratosword catastrophe is one of those things that I mean, I don't want a whole lot of info on it, you know? Like, it's one of those things where I like having a lot of different possibilities for what actually happened. So
hey,
if
man,
you start...
people should go to my page, Land of Song. I've routinely talked about it in the past.
Yeah.
About various different ways of what it might mean, how it's important, what actually might have happened. So yeah.
And
there's good stuff there.
We can talk about other things like what the Marukati Selectives did, which was to perform a ritual of some kind to break the dragon on top of a tower of some kind, of one sort.
Yeah, that's usually how I understand it, is breaking the dragon involves some kind of a tower.
Yeah.
So in the case of the Middle Dawn, it required a white gold tower. If you want to talk about convention and setting up of like actual time, the ending of the Dawn era, that required the adamantine tower. If you want to talk about Numidium and the warp in the west, well, guess what, motherfucker? That involves a tower. Numidium is a tower.
And the Siddiq quest line used the Staff of Towers, so yeah, it's always related to a tower.
Yeah. I would also suggest that the trick about the towers is that to really get the actual juice of what's going on in an Elder Scrolls plot line, you have to start thinking about towers in very abstract metaphorical terms. So towers are in metaphysics, towers are structures built to protect something. I don't even want to be specific about what it is. It can be your soul. It can be a secret. It can be knowledge. It can be a huge range of things. But it doesn't have to always be. Let me back that up. So when you start talking about brass, the walks as brass, the Numidium as a tower, you have to consider what that tower is trying to protect. What's its secret, basically? And in this particular case, that tower's secret is the power that allows it to do what it does. What does Jubal Lansul do in Coda? He literally he's the thief that raids the tower and steals its secret. And in doing so, he defeats the tower. So what did the Marukati Selectives do? They found a tower, scaled it, got to the top. In other words, the secret location they found the secret of the tower and then exploited it. So provided the tower is of significant enough power, that's what it takes to break the dragon. If that's what you want to do, you just need I guess what you need if your question in general is what does it take to break Akatosh, or to cause a dragon break, the answer is the means, the motive, and the opportunity. That's all it takes. And it doesn't really. If you get abstract enough with the tower and the Holy Trinity metaphor, you can apply it to damn near anything. So, what's with all the phallic and vaginal imagery in the Elder Scrolls? Matthew, dude.
yeah,
everywhere.
That's metaphysics in general, man. That's mysticism in general. It's all about everybody's junk. It's.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's about at its source, metaphysics is about creation, and what better example of creation can we have than reproductive processes? So, yeah,
exactly. Although I'm just like, please forgive me for what I'm about to say, but
say it and I'll decide.
All right. I kind of had this idea. You know how you have the term, hey, kid, to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs?
Okay.
In the case of, hey, in Tamriel, if you want to make a change, you got to break a few towers. Dragons.
Yeah. Oh, got to break a few dragons. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That'll work.
So, yeah, I feel bad for that,
yeah, that's
but
all right.
Also not really.
We'll put it on the back of a CD cover.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
A tower powerful enough to pierce the heavens? Yeah, there you go.
Hey, yo, bend the bones that otherwise cannot break.
So I don't There are when we talk about Akatosh and the interpretation of Akatosh in other cultures in Tamriel, 9 times out of 10 it's supposed to be some kind of the entity is supposed to be some kind of a god of order, or sometimes straight outright a god of time. But in Elven mythology, it's almost always like the forces of good. Mm-hmm. And in Manish philosophy, it's not always. Sometimes it's the forces of limitation. And in one very specific northern religion, it doesn't seem to be entered in at all. It's just the one.
Well, I would disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's in one very specific northern religion that splits off into 2. It's still destruction.
Sure.
It's or the catalyst of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I will argue till the end of time that the dragon is the adversary.
Right.
So,
but that's when you're sort of applying a Marish, excuse me, a Manish frame of mind. From the Marish frame of mind, the dragon is the thing that you follow.
Absolutely, yeah.
Akatosh is it's Akka from a previous Kalpa. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a Nordic version of Akatosh, considering that we were talking about the Eldadaga.
Yeah, it's the what
why tusks?
MK. So Kirkbride said Akatosh was created, or sorry, Akatusk was created because the Elno Fae needed a time dragon.
Right.
And that's basically what he is.
Why tusks? Because we're talking about a culture that is very conscious of things like, mammoths
and horkers
and giant cats with big teeth. It's a cultural affectation. I don't think it's necessarily a on one hand, I want to say something like you don't necessarily have to take it literally, and then on the other hand, I'm like, you should take that literally. So. Let's see. I suppose we could have done a little bit more research and talked about how Akatosh was worshipped in various religions, but I didn't do that. The tusks have symbolism. Shore, son of Shore suggests it might just actually, Matthew. That's a very good point. My knowledge of every time I read Shore, son of Shore, I get cross-eyed, so I don't really.
What was the question?
The tusks have a symbolic value of some kind, or a consistent symbolic value, which is probably true.
The consistent symbolic value that I can see, there might be more to it, but it seems to be power or kingship of some sort.
Oh, that would make sense. A little bit like horns.
Yeah, much like horns. So, I mean, going with the culture aspect, mammoths and horkers are big-ass, dangerous animals that can murder you. Mm-hmm. I can never remember his name, but the guy who fights Mirak had tusks on his mask, and he was the leader of the dragon priests. AM has tusks on her mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then Akatosh, or Akatusk, who is the usurper who becomes king with the tusks. So, yeah I think it's sort of a royalty or nobility sort of symbolism.
Mm-hmm. There's a number of dragon masks that have tusks as well, I think.
Yeah. No, it's just the one.
Just the one? Okay.
It's just the one.
All right.
Man, I can't remember his name.
I don't know. Let's see. Anything else we need to add?
Connor Rick. There you go. Anyway.
There you go. Orcs use tusk as a euphemism for penis. That makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tusks are directly tied with the cyclical nature of time on Mundus. Well, that's Akatosh's power. In Shore, Son of Shore, during the scene of convention, Shore draws a circle around the floor of the adamantine tower with a tail-mouthed tusk, which then breaks with a keening sound. So tusks are directly tied with the cyclical nature of time on Mundus. It's because that's Akatosh's... Okay. That's what Akatosh does, is he creates the circle. Yep. He, yeah, instead of everything happening all at once, Akatosh shows up and says, we're doing this in a round. Almalexia's mask has tusks. Oh,
true.
I think those are fangs. Because she's the face-snaked queen of the 3-in-1. Those are fangs. Yeah. Anybody got anything else to add? I figured this was going to be quick, so I'm not worried.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a shame Andrew hasn't gotten in just yet.
Yeah, he did have some notes. Yeah. Well, the next time we do this, we can pick up anybody who wasn't here today can pick up a few points that they may have wanted to raise. So.
Right. Okay. I guess the only other thing that's worth mentioning about Akatosh that we didn't really touch on is the concept of his madness.
Right.
Which
Why do you think he would be mad?
Since Sheogorath is the mad god, but yet we're told that Akatosh has like many different madnesses because even he can't really keep time necessarily straight in his own head, like he's the god of time, but he himself is kind of like messed up by it.
Well, that also there's Johnny Anonymous points out that all gods are nuts, and frankly,
yeah, I would agree.
But
there's also the depiction of Akatosh in Oblivion is he's the two-headed god, the dual aspect god.
Well, the dual aspect is due to his association with Tigre Septim.
Yeah.
But
Same
also,
difference.
I would probably say the reason why Akatosh has is so frequently portrayed as being out of his mind is because Akatosh an Aedra is not supposed to be thinking linearly. One of the reasons why a lot of the Aedra fled the way they did was they saw what happens when the Aedra take on the responsibility of being linear, of being rules. That's not the way Aedra are supposed to exist. In a way, all of the laws of nature, all of the Aedra are completely out of their minds because they're not supposed to be doing what they're doing. By their very nature, they're not supposed to be doing it. So when you're talking about entities that are, their entire essence is what they are, and then they try to change that into something that they're clearly not, they're going to go crazy. I mean, for those of you playing Selectives Bingo, you can tick off Jung. If you try to... Carl Jung suggests that if you act against your nature continuously, or dramatically against your nature, it'll be extremely unpleasant, and if you do it long enough, it'll drive you crazy. You'll become unbalanced. Which makes a lot of sense. You don't have to know anything about psychology for that to make sense. If you do something that is the antithesis of everything you stand for, it's going to drive you crazy, you know? I don't even have to point out to real life for that. I mean, you can watch 1,000,001 movies written about stuff like that. So it's not, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that Akatosh is out of his gourd. That's just, I mean, that was, depending on whose story you believe, that was part of the agreement, or that was part of the punishment, or it was part of the trap. You know?
Yeah, could be either of those.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, the only other thing I can think of is the now famous book from Skyrim, Alduin Ent Akatosh.
Yeah.
And how that kind of loops back to sort of where we started about how there are different aspects or different facets of the same shard, as it were, right? And I think even Matthew Schroeder brought that up early on when I started talking about it, on how, like, yeah, they're all kind of different, but they're all part of the same thing. Like the same oversoul, I guess.
On that note, just in case we get people who are more newish, can we touch on the first son or firstborn of Akatosh?
You mean Alduin?
Yeah. the concept of dragons being Akatosh's children.
Okay.
So Aedra don't necessarily have biological children.
No.
So
we are generally familiar with the yeah, it is a metaphor, Matthew. We
exactly.
do generally understand that the concept of subgradients by now. I think most people in the lore community have kind of gotten their heads around that pretty good.
Sure.
The idea that every time you step down in a dimension, so from Aetherius to Oblivion to Mundus, and every time an act of creation happens, you have what they call subgradients, which is is everybody familiar with the I Ching at all?
Not really.
Little.
All right, hold on a second. I'm gonna switch over to a temporary screen while I oops, wrong button. While I sort this out in my browser. I want to find an image.
Oh my god, AFK, BRB, LOL.
LOL.
It's LOL.
LOL. Open image in new tab. Ooh, that looks like butt dirt. Okay. How about this one? No. The fuck is that? So basically, the I Ching is an Asian structure of logic, I guess you could call it. It's a model to demonstrate the structure of the world, and the I Ching actually, I believe, translates to 64 hexagrams or 64 trigrams, and it's used in a lot of Asian mysticism, predominantly in Taoism. And I'm trying very hard to find a diagram that will explain how they're structured, and I'm not finding anything that's easy to read. But basically, all of the I Ching starts with a... you know what, we're going to go with the most fundamental and frankly kind of craptacular image I can find. No, that's misleading. Okay, this one. All right. We're going to shoot with this. Okay, so... Oh, no, you know what? It's actually because chat's covering that up. All right. So, you have, at its core, the I Ching comes entirely from the combination of two forces, the yin and the yang. Yeah. These two forces, represented by the colors black and white, and everybody is already on board. This is an analog for Anu and Padme. It's change and order. Okay. From there, and this is what I was trying to having difficulty finding. You have two. Well, these two are represented as a solid line, and no, go away. A solid line and a broken line. So this is a solid line right here. I hope my mouse is big enough on this. And yes, 8 spokes. That's right, Slovakine. You're catching on quickly. So there's a line here, and let me get you guys a link to what it is that I'm talking about in the call. I think that'll work. If you try clicking on that link, you might get the same image that I have. And
yes.
Okay, so you've got basically two symbols here that arrive from that. Either a line with a dash in the middle of it, a broken line, or a solid line. And then from those two, you then create 4 variations, which is which is to say you have 2 lines, 2 solid lines, 2 broken lines, a solid line on top and a broken line on the bottom, and then a broken line on top and a solid line on the bottom. And then when you then combine those symbols together, you get these 8 lines, which we're looking at here, or the bagua, the 8 trigrams. And this is sort of the intrinsic beginning of Taoist and basically yin yang thought. Depending on what religion we're talking about, what philosophy we're talking about, they mean different things. Here you've got philosophical concepts like the mountain, the water, wind, heaven, valley, fire, thunder, etc.
Well, yeah, because the symbols are all sort of opposite, right? So the three broken lines are directly opposite the one that's three solid lines.
Exactly.
The one that has a solid line on top and two broken lines on the bottom is
the opposite of
right?
exactly. And
so thunder is like mountain, valley, like that's the opposite, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The opposite of mountain is valley. The opposite of heaven is earth. The opposite of wind is thunder. The opposite of fire is water. It all lines up perfectly. This is, and by the way, for those of you who like to do world building, this is kind of one of the things that bothered Kirkbride when he was building the concept of the Aedra and metaphysics in Elder Scrolls in general, is that the things that the Aedra are represent do not line up perfectly in a Bagua style structure. So you have the god of time and the god of space. Great, that lines up perfectly. And then you have the god of I hate undead. And then you have the god of commerce or justice. And then you have the god of love. And then you've got the god of also love. And you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So they don't line up nearly as well, and because the Aedra were supposed to be influenced by early Elder Scrolls religions, it stands to love and love, bird and serpent. So because they were supposed to be they were basically supposed to be the very first gods ever worshipped on Mundus. They should have, logically, like psychologically speaking, for humans, they should have represented extremely primal forces. But instead, you've got one god that seems to be representing, like, marriage or commerce or exchange or something. That doesn't really line up. That's a cultural. That's like the historically speaking, the idea of exchange is something that happens much further in the development of the human psyche. The counter argument to that, and one that I actually quite like, is that mortals on Tamriel were never primitive. That they came into existence and immediately had inherited a culture of some kind from their creation deities. So
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So these more complex gods that show up in the 8 Aedra, the more complex concepts sort of work. The problem with that is that what they don't do is they don't form a science of metaphysics that's relatively feasible for an author to use. To create an entirely new metaphysical structure based on really complex concepts like commerce or one god that is just sort of the domain of the dead doesn't really work. It's just, well, it works. It could theoretically work, but it's appallingly difficult. And as you guys know, Kirkbride was basically contracted to write 40 in-game books in a week, which, I mean, he got 36 of them bitches done, and then a couple of extras. And that's what we got, and it's considered a damn miracle in the video game industry that anybody was able to write that stuff in a week. So,
I believe Kirkbride is on record as saying a lot of it was written in like a flurry of cigarettes.
Yeah.
Actually, last week, Andrew was talking to him on Reddit about it, and he said he basically thanked his roommate at the time for leaving him offerings of beer, cigarettes, and pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pray at the altar of the elk, bring these offerings.
And that's sort of why actually, Tord is pointing out a really interesting point that a lot of cultures claim to come from a previous Kalpa, which you might be able to surmise that that means that the these cultures have been in evolution for millennia, and so what we're looking at is not, from the Dawn Age to now is the entire span of culture. It's been actually something that's been worked on for a really long time. So,
well, yeah, I mean, look how often, just as an example, the Red Guards like sail to new places when shit gets tough, or they go to the far shores, a place of waiting, where they're just kind of preserving the memory.
Yep, that's
and
right.
Also, Red Guards have gods who change their name. Like, oh yeah, Talpapa, yeah, he actually used to be called Ruptga, but no one gives a shit about that name anymore.
Yeah,
Tuako's the god of nobody really cares before he became this god. It's like, yeah, no, even gods change, man.
Yeah.
So
along that, there was a new thing that happened in Elsewhere, where one of the ghosts mentioned that he was going to go to the sand behind the stars and wait for the next pounce.
Right.
So even they're pretty aware of this cycle.
Yeah, I was just reading an article earlier today specifically about Elsewhere, where the author was talking about how he was spending a lot of time in the Elsewhere expansion, just running dungeons and stuff, and because he was doing the first quest for the first main quest in Elsewhere, and he was just like, I don't really care about this. And he said eventually he got around to getting to like the second and third part of that, and he said, do not overlook the main quest in Elsewhere. It's supposed to be really, really good.
It is. So, it is very good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back into it this week. Yeah, no, I can't spoil it. I haven't done any of it. I'm actually. I have. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting my claws back into it this week. So it'll be nice.
I get it. Because cats have claws.
Stream it? I doubt it very seriously. It's really, honestly, it's just gotten to the point now where I can't continuously do one thing for more than about an hour and a half. Not because my life is so unpleasant and I've got all these distractions and stuff. I'm just old and I can't pay attention to things.
How old are you, by the way? Because I feel old and I'm 30.
I'm gonna be 45 in July.
Oh dang.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's but I just sort of, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, wow. Yeah, great.
You are definitely like the veteran elder council of us lore beards. We're all these scrappy whippersnappers.
Thanks for that, Slovakine. Here's the secret: shave your head, don't have kids. That's it. That's how you look good at 45. Is don't have kids and shave your head, so people can't see how gray you are, and and you don't get stressed out of your mind dealing with the little rugrats. So yeah.
There you go.
No, I don't think that well, okay, so I don't remember how I got into the damn I Ching. Sorry.
Because I kind of brought it up indirectly by talking about Alduin ain't Akatosh, and then that led us into the discussion briefly about Shore, Son of Shore.
Oh, it was, yeah.
And then
we were talking about subgradients and
yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of and what I was trying to get at with the concept of the I Ching was that each one of these iterations, from the first to the 4 different steps and then to these 8 steps, is considered to be a subgradient. So what you're seeing here now is what, in a way, what you could be looking at here if Kirkbride had his druthers and could go back and rewrite the entirety of the Elder Scrolls lore system from the ground up. What he would be doing is he would be taking the God of Order and the God of Chaos, and then he would be, and then like all 8 of these would be one. Would this be a god? This would be 8 gods, and so you'd have this god right here would be dominantly Order, and this god would be dominantly Chaos, and this god would be mostly Order, Chaos, and a little bit of Order, and so on. And he would create personalities for all of these. But and this is what's very important for the I Ching, is that yin and yang, but these little dots are very relevant. They're not there by accident. The shape of this symbol is supposed to indicate constant interplay. They're constantly fighting, sort of. That's why it looks like it's swirling. But the little dots mean that even the forces of yin and the forces of yang are not pure. There is no purity in the I Ching metaphysics. You're always a little bit of black, you know, in all this. It's always a little bit of white in all of this.
Well, yeah, and I've heard some people describe it also as seeing the bad in the good and the good in the bad.
Exactly. This is sort of like when you take when you're talking about the way that a person could play a chaotic evil character but still do good things, or a lawful good character and do bad things. It's the same thing. When you talk about the interplay back and forth between Padme and Anu, and you're still talking about two very primary forces that are fighting each other, and then when you get down to Akatosh and Lorcan, you're talking about several subgradients of Anu and Padme that are now duking it out with each other, but their relationship is much more complex. It's not black versus white. It's shades of gray versus... It's a lighter shade of gray versus a darker shade of gray.
Yeah.
It's a lighter shade of pale. Yeah.
Also, I would just like to point out I am really close to bingo.
Should I mention the new Harry Potter ebooks that are coming out in a minute? Does that help you out?
No. But there's another famous book.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if I suppose I could probably talk a little bit about... me and Jonathan could probably talk a little bit about the new Warhammer 40k paint line. That's coming out.
It's a book that Ziegler
no, you're talking about Dune.
It looks good. Looks good.
You're talking about Dune, I think.
Yeah. So someone just wants to.
There you go.
Mention something about Dune in a relevant capacity. Like not just
I can't make it relevant.
Yeah, here Dune reference, and then I click it. Like no, if someone has a relevant reason to bring up Dune, then I have bingo.
I'm sorry, I can't make it relevant in any way. Although, I mean, I do want to sort of nerd out about that. What is it? The House Delaque, something like that in Necromunda, that look a lot like guild navigators from Dune.
Oh man, they really do.
They do, don't they? They really do.
Yes.
The worms in Coda are wingless dragons. Hey, there you go. Shai-Hulud is a symbol for the concept of order, because Shai-Hulud purifies all things. And there's a prayer that they do. What was it? I can't remember.
You guys would have a better idea than me. I don't know.
May his passage cleanse the world. There it is. See, that's Alduin right there. O mighty Shai-Hulud, keeper of balance, bless the maker and his water, bless the coming and going of him, may his passage cleanse the world.
Fire cleanses things?
Fire? Yeah, maybe, but I mean, it's Alduin all over again. May his passing cleanse the world. Yeah. Right. There you go. There's your relevant Dune comment.
Woohoo! Bingo!
All right. Yeah, there you go. All right. Don't forget to cash that in up front. There's an old lady who takes your ticket. Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay, so I think we're done on that ridiculous piece of nonsense.
Thank you for entertaining me.
What's next after Akatosh? It's
RK.
That's right. Terrific.
I'm excited for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll get to bring it back to Yokoda.
That's right. Thanks everybody for showing up. If you're watching this on YouTube, and you're not subbed to the channel, go ahead and wait, I'm not doing this like a whore. Don't forget to smash that LB on my YT and ring that bell for updates. There you go.
Please enable me to be a
share, and subscribe. That's right. Yeah, follow me on TwitTube. Fucking, I don't know, whatever. I'm old.
Our link to our donation page will be below.
We don't have a donation page.
We don't have one, but it had to be said.
It's my bank account.
All right. Yeah. Okay. But everybody pretend like you have your webcams on and wave goodbye.
Bye.